The ballroom is too bright for what's happening. Crystal lights spill down like clean water, and the tables are set with plates no one is touching. Men in black jackets glide between chairs like they've been trained to ignore feelings. Women in expensive dresses laugh too loudly, like laughter can keep a crack from widening. On the small stage at the front, a microphone stands alone. And near the side wall, half hidden by a row of tall palms in gold pots, David Geffen is standing still in a way that makes people uncomfortable. Not loud, not angry, just still. It's the kind of stillness that pulls attention like gravity. Across the room, Jackson Browne is not sitting. He is already moving toward the exit, his steps calm, his face flat, his eyes looking at nothing in particular, like he has already decided the night is over and all that is left is the simple act of leaving. The problem is, everyone has noticed, because Jackson doesn't leave rooms like this, not without a goodbye, not without the polite smile that says it's fine. And David doesn't get left, not in public, not with cameras close enough to smell the sweat under your collar, not with label executives watching, waiting to see if the king of the room can still hold the room, not with young assistants who tell stories later about who blinked first, but Jackson is walking anyway. David watches him pass the first table. Then the second. David's hands are at his sides. His fingers move once like he almost reaches for something, his phone, a glass, a sleeve, but he stops himself. There is a moment where he could let it happen, let Jackson go, let the night finish without a scene. He could tell himself it doesn't matter. He could tell himself Jackson is emotional, that he'll cool down, that he'll call in the morning. But David Geffen has lived long enough to know the sound of a door that might not open again. He steps away from the palms, not fast, not dramatic. He walks like he's crossing a minefield he can't admit is there. And when he catches up, he does not grab Jackson. He does not block him. He only speaks his name once, low. Jackson. Jackson stops because the room expects him to stop, because if he doesn't, the story becomes something uglier, because the people watching have already started to hold their breath. Jackson turns slowly. His eyes meet David's, and there is no warmth there, only a kind of tired restraint that can cut deeper than shouting. "What?" Jackson says, not as a question, more like a final statement. David swallows. You can see his throat move. It's small, but under these lights, everything is visible. "Not here," David says. Jackson's mouth tightens. "Then you shouldn't have made it here." That lands like a plate dropped behind a curtain. Not loud, but enough to make a few heads turn harder. David's face shifts. For a second, something sharp flashes behind his eyes. Pride, anger, fear. It could be any of them, or all at once. Then it settles into something else. He leans in slightly, close enough that the crowd can't easily read his lips. "Please," David says. That word doesn't belong on David Geffen's tongue. It doesn't fit. It's too naked, too human. And it's real. Jackson stares at him like he didn't expect it, like he almost thinks he misheard. David adds quieter, "Come back." Jackson looks past David toward the room, toward the stage, toward the microphone waiting like a trap. He looks at the people pretending not to watch. Then he looks back at David. "You want me back for you," Jackson says, "or for them?" David's jaw flexes. He doesn't answer right away. He knows the wrong answer will make Jackson walk for good. "I want you back because I don't want this to be how it ends," David says. Jackson lets out a breath that might be a laugh if it had any joy in it. David's eyes flick for a moment toward the doors, toward the hallway beyond, where it gets quieter, darker, real. He nods once like he's making a decision. "Come outside," he says. "Just 5 minutes. If you still want to go after that, I won't stop you." Jackson's fingers curl and uncurl at his side. His shoulders lift slightly, then lower, like he's fighting the urge to say something harsh. Finally, he turns toward the hallway instead of the exit, not agreeing, not forgiving, just postponing the ending. The hallway is dimmer. The sound of the room muffles behind them like someone closing a thick door on a storm. The carpet is deep and soft, the kind that makes your footsteps feel swallowed. There are framed photos on the wall, other nights, other smiles, other people who once thought they were safe. David leads, but not far ahead. He doesn't want Jackson to feel chased. He doesn't want to be the man dragging someone back. At the end of the hallway, there's a side door that opens to a service patio, a place meant for staff smoke breaks and late-night logistics, not for men like them. The air is colder out there, honest. The city hum is distant, and the night smells faintly like exhaust and wet concrete. David steps out first and holds the door, not as a gesture of power, but as a quiet courtesy. Jackson follows, his face unreadable. For a moment, neither speaks. David pulls his jacket tighter. He looks older out here, away from the lights, not weak, just exposed. Jackson's gaze moves over the skyline, not really seeing it. David clears his throat. "I didn't know you were coming tonight." Jackson's eyes snap back. "That's the problem. You never know anything unless it's on a calendar." David flinches, but he keeps his voice even. "I know you've been upset." Jackson's laugh is short and sharp. "Upset, that's the word you pick." David looks down at his shoes for a second, then back up. "Tell me what you want me to hear." Jackson doesn't answer immediately. He runs a hand through his hair, slow, as if buying time to keep himself from exploding. "I didn't come here for a fight," Jackson says finally. "I didn't even come here for you." David's mouth opens, then closes. Jackson continues, "I came because someone told me you were saying things, saying I was difficult, that I was ungrateful, that I was replaced." David's eyes narrow. "Who told you that?" Jackson shakes his head. "Does it matter? You always want a name, you always want a target. That's how you fix things. You point, you fire, you move on." David breathes in slowly. "Jackson, I don't go around." "You don't go around," Jackson cuts in, his tone rising just a notch. "You don't need to. You say it once in the right ear, in the right room, and it spreads like smoke." David's lips press together. The cold air makes his skin look pale. Jackson steps closer, not aggressively, just close enough to make the words unavoidable. "Do you know what it's like," Jackson says, "to write songs that feel like they're made of your own bone, and then have someone treat you like a product, like a corner you can sell, like a chair you can replace?" David's eyes flicker. There's guilt there and something else, defensiveness mixed with a kind of sorrow he doesn't want to admit. "I never treated you like a chair," David says. Jackson's voice goes quiet again. That quiet is worse. "You treated me like a problem to manage," he says. "And the second I stopped being easy, you started looking for someone easier." David's nostrils flare. "You think I didn't fight for you?" Jackson's gaze hardens. "Did you, or did you fight for what you could get from me?" David takes a step back, like the question physically pushed him. The door behind them swings slightly in the wind and then settles, like even the building is listening. David puts his hands in his pockets, then takes them out again. His body can't find a comfortable place to put itself. "I'm not good at this," he says quietly. Jackson's eyes narrow. "At what?" "At saying things that make me look small," David says. Jackson blinks, almost caught off guard. David continues, "I built my whole life on making things happen, moving people, moving money, moving moments. I learned early that if you hesitate, someone else takes it." Jackson stares at him, not softened, just attentive. David looks out into the night as if he can't say the next part while looking at Jackson. "And somewhere along the way," David says, "I started believing that if I could make the moment happen, the people inside it didn't matter as much as the moment itself." Jackson's face changes slightly, a crack, a shift, not forgiveness, but recognition. David turns back. "I didn't say those things to hurt you," Jackson scoffs. "That's the classic line." David nods once. "I know, I hate it too." He pauses, and when he speaks again, his voice is lower. The edge is gone. "You know what the truth is?" David says. "I got scared." Jackson's jaw tightens. "Of what?" David hesitates. The silent stretches filled with city noise and distant laughter from inside. "I got scared," David says, "that you didn't need me anymore." Jackson stares, surprised despite himself. David keeps going, and now the words come like he's pulling them out of a place he keeps locked. "You walked into rooms and people listened because of you," David says. "Not because of my invitations, not because of my calls. You were your own force." Jackson's eyes flick down briefly, then back up. And I think, David says, I started trying to hold on tighter, not to help you, to keep you close enough that I still mattered. Jackson's mouth opens slightly, then closes. He looks away, staring at the streetlight glow. The wind lifts the edge of his shirt, and he pulls it down as if the cold is suddenly getting to him. You wanted to own the feeling, Jackson says softly. That's what it is. David doesn't deny it. Jackson exhales. I'm not a feeling you can own. I know, David says. Jackson turns back. His eyes are glossy but not spilling. He's holding it in like he always does, like men like him have to. When my father died, Jackson says, and the words land heavy, do you know what I did that week? David's eyes widen. He wasn't expecting this direction. He shakes his head slightly. I went into a studio, Jackson says, because I didn't know where else to put it. I wrote like my hands were on fire, and when the song came out, people told me it saved them. He swallows. And you know what I told myself? Jackson continues. I told myself, okay, this pain isn't pointless. It becomes something. It becomes useful. David listens like he's afraid to blink. Jackson's voice trembles just a little. Then the business part came in, the meetings, the schedules, the smiling, the counting. He looks at David now with a kind of quiet anger that isn't loud, but it's deep. And suddenly, Jackson says, my pain wasn't mine anymore. It was a thing people traded. David's face tightens. I never wanted to trade your pain. But you did, Jackson says. Even if you didn't mean to. There is another long silence. Inside the ballroom, a muffled cheer rises and falls like someone on stage just told a joke. The world keeps spinning, careless. David looks at Jackson, and for the first time tonight, he seems less like a man who controls rooms and more like a man asking not to be abandoned. You're right, David says. I did. Jackson's eyes narrow, waiting for the defense that usually comes next. But David doesn't defend, he takes a breath. I'm sorry. Jackson's face doesn't soften, not yet. David adds, not sorry like a press release, sorry like I should have stopped myself and I didn't. Jackson looks away again. His throat moves as he swallows. David steps closer, careful, like approaching an animal that has been hurt. I heard you were leaving, David says. Not tonight. Leaving for good. Leaving all of it. Jackson's shoulders rise and fall. I've been thinking about it. David nods, slow. I figured. Jackson's voice is almost a whisper. I'm tired, David. David's eyes lower. I know you are. I'm tired of being watched, Jackson says. Tired of every kind word having a hook behind it. David doesn't answer. He can't argue with that. Jackson speaks again, and now the hurt comes out clearer. I needed someone to tell me the music still mattered, Jackson says. Not the numbers, not the headlines, the music. David's lips part. He wants to say he did tell him. He wants to list the ways he supported him, the opportunities, the doors opened. But he stops himself. Because Jackson didn't ask for a list, he asked for a moment. So David does something that surprises even him. He lowers his voice. Tell me what you're afraid of, he says. Jackson's face hardens. Why? Because, David says, if you leave, you'll tell yourself it was because they ruined it, because the business ruined it, because I ruined it. Jackson's eyes flicker. And maybe some of that is true, David says, but I don't want you to leave believing you have nothing left inside you that's yours. Jackson stares. David continues, if you go, go because you chose it, not because you were pushed. Jackson's jaw clenches. His eyes shine more now. Still no tears, but close. What changed you? Jackson asks, voice rough, to say something like that. David's mouth twitches, almost a sad smile, then it disappears. I watched someone I cared about walk away once, David says, a long time ago. Jackson waits. David looks down at the concrete under their feet. His voice is steady, but it carries weight. I didn't chase them, David says. I told myself they were being dramatic. I told myself they'd come back. He pauses. They didn't, he says simply. Jackson's expression shifts. Not sympathy exactly, but something human. David lifts his eyes again. I don't want to be that man tonight. The wind hits harder and both of them feel it. David shivers once. From inside, the door opens a crack. A young assistant peeks out, eyes wide, trying to see without looking like they're seeing. David turns his head slightly, and the assistant pulls back. The door closes again. Even out here, the room is watching. Jackson finally speaks, and when he does, it's softer. "You begged me," he says. David doesn't flinch from the word. "Yeah." Jackson shakes his head almost in disbelief. "You don't beg." David looks at him. "Apparently I do." Jackson's lips press together, fighting something. He looks toward the dark sky. "You know what the worst part is?" Jackson says. David waits. Jackson's voice cracks just a little. "I still care what you think. That lands heavier than any accusation." David's eyes widen, and for a moment he looks almost ashamed. "Jackson," David says, and his voice is careful, "that's not a weakness." Jackson's face tightens. "It feels like one." David nods slow. "I know." He takes a breath, and then he says something that sounds like it hurts him to say. "You don't have to care what I think," David says. "Not anymore." Jackson turns back sharply. "Then why are we out here?" David holds his gaze. "Because I care what you think." Jackson's brow furrows. David speaks with calm urgency now, like he knows this is the edge of the cliff. "I built things," David says. "Labels, deals, careers. I built them like walls, strong, clean, tall." He gestures toward the ballroom behind them without looking. "And sometimes," David says, "I forgot that a wall can also be a cage." Jackson's eyes flicker. He's listening. He hates himself for listening, but he is. "I don't know how to undo everything," David says. "I don't know how to rewind all the moments where I treated you like a problem instead of a person." He pauses. "But I can do one thing," he says. "I can stop tonight from turning into a story where you leave and I pretend I didn't care." Jackson swallows. David's voice drops lower. "I did care." The words hang in the air. Jackson looks at him for a long time. His face is still guarded, but the anger is losing its sharpness, not gone, just tired. "Do you remember the first time you heard me play?" Jackson asks quietly. David's eyes shift, trying to find the memory. Jackson doesn't wait. "You were in the back. You didn't clap at first. You watched like you were studying a machine." David exhales. "That sounds like me." Jackson nods. "After you came up and you said you're going to be hard to stop." David's eyes soften slightly. "I said that." "You did," Jackson says, "and it scared me." David tilts his head. Jackson's voice is low, because it sounded like a threat and a compliment at the same time. David's mouth tightens. "I didn't mean it as a threat." "I know," Jackson says, "but that's the thing. You don't always know what you mean." David flinches. That hits. Jackson steps back a little, creating space again. "I've spent years," Jackson says, "trying to keep my soul intact in a world that keeps trying to take pieces of it, and when I felt like you were part of that taking—" He trails off, looking down. "It made me want to disappear," he finishes. David's eyes are wet now. He doesn't wipe them, he just blinks slowly, like he's trying to keep control without denying what's happening. "I don't want you to disappear," David says. Jackson's voice is almost flat. "Then let me go." David shakes his head once, small. "Not like that." Jackson's gaze sharpens again. "What do you want, David?" David holds the look. "I want one honest thing," he says. Jackson doesn't move. David gestures back toward the ballroom. They're expecting a moment, a photo, a story. Jackson's eyes narrow, suspicion returning. "So this is still about them." David lifts both hands slightly, palms out. "No, listen," he inhales. "I'm going to tell you the truth," David says. "I did want you back for the room." Jackson's jaw tightens. David doesn't stop. "And I also want you back because if you leave tonight, a part of me will know it was my fault. And I don't know if I can carry that quietly." Jackson stares. David adds, "I can carry a lot. I'm good at carrying things. But not that." The cold air feels sharper now. Jackson's eyes shine, and this time a tear actually forms but doesn't fall. It just sits there, held back by pride. "What changed your mind?" Jackson asks again, voice rougher. "Why now?" David looks at him, and the answer is simple, stripped of polish. "Because you finally stopped pretending," David says. and I realized I've been living around truth instead of inside it. Jackson looks away, jaw clenched. David takes a small step closer. If you come back in there, he says, don't do it for me, don't do it for them, do it for you. Jackson scoffs softly. And what does that even mean? David doesn't rush. It means, walk in there, look at the microphone, and decide what you want your own ending to sound like. Jackson's breathing is slow. His shoulders drop a fraction. David watches him carefully like he's reading the smallest signs. Jackson speaks quietly. I don't want to sing tonight. David nods immediately. Then don't. Jackson looks back, surprised. They'll be furious. David's eyes harden for the first time, not toward Jackson, but toward the invisible crowd. Let them. Jackson studies him, trying to see if he means it. David adds, you don't owe them performance to prove you're okay. Jackson's lips part slightly. He closes them again. Another pause. Inside the ballroom, the muffled sound of someone tapping the microphone comes through the wall. A voice rises, an announcer, upbeat, calling for attention. The night is moving forward without them. The room is ready to create its own story if they don't step back in. Jackson looks at the door. His hand lifts, then drops. David doesn't speak. He doesn't push. He doesn't fill the silence with persuasion. He just stands there, letting the decision belong to Jackson. That restraint is new. It shows. Jackson turns fully toward David. His eyes are tired. If I come back, Jackson says, it doesn't fix everything. David nods. I know. It doesn't erase the way I felt, Jackson says. I know, David repeats softer. And I'm not going to smile for them, Jackson says. David's mouth tightens, then he nods. Good. Jackson watches him a moment longer like he's testing for hidden hooks. Then Jackson lets out a long breath. Okay, he says, almost like surrender. 5 minutes. David's shoulders sag in relief so subtle most people would miss it. He doesn't thank Jackson. He doesn't make it a victory. He just opens the door. They step back into the hallway, and the muffled noise grows louder. As they walk, the framed photos on the wall feel like silent witnesses. When they reach the ballroom doors, the sound spills out. Laughter, clapping, the announcer's voice saying something about a special moment and a true legend. David and Jackson pause just inside the doorway, still hidden from most of the room. David leans slightly toward Jackson. You don't have to go on that stage, he murmurs. Jackson nods once, eyes forward. They step into view. The nearest tables notice first. Heads turn in a wave. Conversations die down like candles being pinched. People sit taller. Smiles appear quickly, practiced like masks snapped on. The announcer on stage falters mid-sentence, then recovers with a wide grin. There he is, the announcer says, voice bright. And with David, too. Applause rises, hungry, cameras lift. Jackson stands still. He doesn't wave, he doesn't bow, he doesn't give the room what it wants. He looks at the stage, then at the people, and then his eyes settle on the microphone. David stays beside him, not touching him, not guiding him, just there. The announcer gestures toward the stage. Come on up, we were hoping. Jackson lifts a hand, small, calm. Not angry. Just a quiet stop. The announcer freezes, smile stuck. Jackson speaks, and his voice carries even without the microphone because the room is silent now. I'm not here to perform, he says. A ripple moves through the crowd. Confusion, disappointment, irritation, faces flicker. Jackson continues steady. I came because I heard something that hurt, and I didn't want to leave with it still inside me. People shift in their chairs. A few glance at David, waiting for him to fix this. David does not move. Jackson looks at David then, just for a second, and that second is everything. Because the room can see it, this is not a show. This is not a stunt. This is a man choosing his own boundary in public. Jackson turns back to the crowd. I don't know what story you thought you were getting tonight, he says, but I'm not going to give you a clean one. The announcer's face tightens. A nervous laugh escapes somewhere, then dies. Jackson's eyes return to the microphone, and after a pause, long enough to make the tension feel like a wire pulled tight, he steps toward the stage, slow, not dramatic, just honest. He climbs the steps one at a time. He does not smile. When he reaches the microphone, he adjusts it slightly, not for performance, but because it's in the wrong place for his height. The small act feels intimate, like making a bed in a strange house. He looks out at the crowd. "I want to say one thing," Jackson says into the microphone. His voice is calm, serious, heavy. "Tonight I almost walked out of this room," he says, "and if I had, it would have been because I didn't trust the people in it to see me as a person." A murmur runs through the crowd, and it's not applause, it's discomfort. Jackson continues, "I'm still not sure you do." He pauses. Then he adds, "But one person came after me anyway." All eyes swing toward David. David doesn't smile. He looks like he's trying not to swallow too hard. He stands with his hands at his sides, exposed under the chandeliers. Jackson looks down at him from the stage. "And he didn't come after me like a boss," Jackson says. "He came after me like someone who was afraid." The room goes completely still. David's throat moves. Jackson's voice stays steady. "I can't tell you what that fixes. I don't know if it fixes anything." He pauses and his eyes drop for a second, like he is checking himself, making sure he doesn't turn this into a speech. Then he looks back up. "But I came back in," Jackson says, "because I wanted to know if fear can be honest without becoming cruel." He stops there. No big finish. No joke. No song. Just the words hanging in the air like smoke. For a long moment no one claps. They don't know if they're allowed. Then one person begins slowly, uncertainly. A quiet clap, then another. It spreads, but it's not celebratory. It's respectful, almost shaken. Jackson steps away from the microphone. He walks down the steps. David watches him approach, and for the first time tonight his face breaks, not into triumph, but into something like relief mixed with regret. Jackson reaches him. He doesn't hug him, he doesn't shake his hand. He just stands close enough that David can hear him. "You didn't win," Jackson says quietly. David nods once. "I know." Jackson's eyes hold his. "Don't make me regret coming back." David's voice is barely audible. "I won't." They stand there while the applause continues, softer now, fading into awkward chatter as people try to return to normal. But normal doesn't fit anymore, because something has shifted. Not in a way you can put on a poster, not in a way that sells, just in a way that makes the room feel less safe for pretending. Jackson turns slightly, looking around. Some faces are touched, some are annoyed, some are thoughtful. Some look away, ashamed to have wanted a show. The announcer steps back up to the microphone, clears his throat, tries to rescue the night with a bright voice. People laugh again, too loudly. But underneath it, the air feels different. David leans in toward Jackson. "Do you want to leave now?" he asks. Jackson considers. He looks at the exit, then at the tables, then back at David. "No," Jackson says. "Not yet." David blinks. "Why?" Jackson's mouth tightens. "Because if I leave right after, they'll still turn it into a story. A dramatic exit, a headline." David nods slowly. Jackson adds, "I want to sit. I want to eat something. I want to look ordinary. I want to take the power out of it." David's expression softens. "Okay." They move to a quiet table near the side, away from the stage. People glance at them as they pass, but no one approaches. Not yet. The space around them holds, respectful, cautious. A waiter appears, almost trembling, and places water glasses down with hands that try not to shake. Jackson takes a sip. His hand is steady now. David does the same. They sit in silence for a moment, letting the noise wash around them. Jackson looks at the plate in front of him and takes a small bite of bread, like he's proving to himself he can still do normal things after saying something that raw. David watches him, and then carefully he speaks. "I meant what I said outside," David murmurs. "If you ever want out, I won't punish you." Jackson doesn't look up. "You don't have that power." David nods, accepting the correction. "You're right, I don't." Jackson chews slowly. He swallows. Then he looks up at David. "You asked me what I was afraid of," Jackson says. David waits. Jackson's voice is quieter. I'm afraid I'll wake up one day and realize I spent my life trying to stay clean in a dirty room. David's eyes lower. He nods. And I'm afraid, Jackson adds, that I'll become like you. David's face tightens, but he doesn't lash out. He doesn't make it about pride. He just asks softly, "Is that what you think I am? Dirty?" Jackson holds his gaze, and for a long moment he seems torn between honesty and mercy. Finally he says, "I think you started out wanting to build something beautiful, and then you got addicted to building." David lets that sink in. He nods slowly. "That might be the truest thing anyone's ever said to me." Jackson watches him. David's voice goes low. "And maybe tonight is the first time I noticed what I crushed under the bricks." Jackson's jaw tightens. "Not just tonight," David nods again. "Not just tonight." Another pause. Jackson looks toward the stage again, where the announcer is now trying to bring the energy back up. Someone is being honored, someone is smiling, someone is waving like they're floating above their own life. Jackson's eyes drift back to David. "What made you follow me?" Jackson asks quietly, "instead of letting me go?" David stares into his water glass for a moment. He turns it slightly, watching the light bend. Then he answers, simple. "Because when you turned away," David says, "I saw myself in you for the first time." Jackson's brow furrows. David continues, "Not the success, not the talent, the loneliness, the part that can't admit it needs anyone." Jackson doesn't respond, but something in his face softens, not toward David's power, but toward David's humanity. The night continues around them. People come and go, speeches happen, plates are cleared, laughter rises and falls like waves, but at their table, something quiet holds. Eventually, someone approaches, an older man with a forced smile, a handshake ready. He says something polite, something about brave words, something about respect. Jackson nods politely, says nothing more than needed. David watches, and he doesn't rescue the conversation, he doesn't smooth it over. He lets Jackson control the space. When the man leaves, Jackson looks at David as if noting the change. David meets his eyes and says nothing. That silence is a kind of promise. Later, much later, the lights dim slightly as the event winds down. People stand, coats being fetched, goodbyes exchanged like currency. Jackson and David remain seated until the room empties enough that leaving won't be a spectacle. When they finally stand, Jackson looks tired in a way that goes beyond sleep. David speaks softly. "Can I drive you home?" Jackson shakes his head. "I need to be alone." David nods, accepting it, no offense. Jackson starts to turn, then pauses. He looks at David for a long time, the way you look at someone you've loved and hated and needed all in the same life. "You beg," Jackson says again, quieter now. "That's why I came back." David swallows. "I know." Jackson's eyes shine. "Don't use it." David's face tightens. "I won't." Jackson nods once, like sealing it. Then he walks away, not rushed, not dramatic, just a man leaving a room. David watches him go, hands at his sides again. But the stillness in him is different now, not prideful, not strategic, just heavy. Outside the ballroom, the city night holds its cold breath. The service patio door is closed now, but David can still feel the wind from earlier, like it stayed inside his chest. As the last guests leave and the staff begin clearing tables, David remains for a moment, alone near the palms. He looks at the stage, at the microphone, at the empty chairs. For years he believed moments could be built, purchased, protected. But tonight showed him something he can't sell or schedule. A person can walk away without slamming a door. A person can come back without surrendering. And a word like please can cost more than money. David turns toward the exit. The room behind him is already becoming a story people will tell. Some will say Jackson embarrassed him. Some will say David made a brilliant move. Some will say it was all planned. But David knows what it really was. It was a man standing in a cold wind, admitting fear without dressing it up. It was another man hearing that fear and deciding just for one night not to punish it. And somewhere in the quiet space between them, between leaving and staying, something changed. Not enough to make everything right, but enough to keep a door from locking forever. When David steps out into the night, the air hits his face like a clean truth. He doesn't look back. And down the street, somewhere beyond the lights and traffic, Jackson Browne rides alone in a car with the window cracked, letting the cold air sting his eyes so no one can tell what's there. He doesn't sing. He doesn't smile. He just breathes. And the sound of that breath, steady, restrained, alive, follows him into the dark.